There's a quiet phase nobody prepares you for. It's the space after someone exits your life, when your thoughts won't slow down. You replay old moments, you rewrite conversations, you feel the urge to send one last message, not to reconnect, but to be understood, to make sure they know what they lost. And this is where most people give away their strength, not because they cared, but because they reacted. Stoic philosophy has always warned about this moment, not the loss itself, but the impulse that follows it, the urge to speak when silence would have protected your dignity. Many people believe they'll be remembered for their final words, for the perfect explanation, for closure. But people rarely miss you because of what you said when you left. They miss you because of how your absence feels when your presence is no longer there. Value is not felt at the moment of departure. It's felt in the space that follows. And that space is shaped not by reaction, but by who you become afterward. This video is not about making someone regret losing you. That way of thinking keeps you emotionally tied to a past that no longer deserves your energy. Stoicism offers something stronger: alignment instead of reaction, self-command instead of emotional chasing. When your inner life is steady, your silence speaks for you. Regret, when it appears, is not something you manufacture. It forms naturally when someone realizes that the calm presence they once had access to is no longer available. Modern culture misunderstands silence. It calls it avoidance, weakness, suppression. The Stoics saw it differently. Silence is restraint. Silence is clarity. Silence is what remains when you stop negotiating your worth with people who were never responsible for it. When you stop explaining yourself, you don't disappear. You become defined. And that wholeness changes how your absence is felt. In the next few minutes, we'll explore 7 quiet Stoic ways of living that often lead others to realize what they lost. Not because you tried to teach them a lesson, but because you chose self-control over emotional reaction. These are not tactics to impress, provoke, or dominate. They are principles for protecting your peace and moving forward with dignity. If you've ever wondered whether silence means losing power, or whether it might be the very thing that preserves it, stay with this video. This isn't about being remembered. It's about becoming someone who no longer needs to be. Let's begin. Way 1. Stay silent, but grow relentlessly. Silence doesn't mean disappearing to be noticed. It means stepping back to rebuild what was neglected while you were trying to be understood. Most people rush to fill the gap with explanations, updates, or visible progress. The Stoic does the opposite. They withdraw words, not effort. There is power in growing without witnesses. When you stop narrating your healing, it becomes real. Public transformation invites comparison. Silent transformation builds stability. True Stoic growth begins internally. Habits reshape your nervous system. Values guide your choices. Reactions lose control over your behavior. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to be content to simply be what you are, not to perform it. When growth becomes a performance, it still depends on approval. When growth is private, it belongs fully to you. It looks like consistency where chaos once lived, calm where urgency once ruled, self-respect where reassurance was once required. These changes don't announce themselves, but they are felt over time. And when someone who once had access to your energy notices that you are calmer and less reactive, realization arrives quietly, without confrontation, not because you tried to prove anything, but because patterns never lie. Way 2. Detach with grace. Detachment is not coldness. It's clarity without resentment. When someone disappoints or walks away, the instinct is to hold on through anger or explanation. Stoicism asks for something harder, to leave without damaging your own character. No final speeches. No emotional accounting. No need to balance the scales. Dignity is not preserved by staying to prove your worth. It's preserved by knowing when staying no longer serves your values. Graceful detachment denies the ego what it wants most: recognition, validation, and visible regret. But that refusal is exactly what gives it strength. When there is no anger to fight and no explanation to debate, silence becomes a boundary, not a message. And that calm absence often feels unsettling to people who expect emotional noise. Grace also protects you. Anger keeps your nervous system tied to what you're trying to leave. Release frees energy for what's ahead. Over time, composure becomes visible not as superiority, but as quiet self-respect. The calmest exits often leave the strongest impressions, not by design but by character. Way 3, become emotionally unreachable, not unreachable out of bitterness, but unreachable because your peace is no longer open for negotiation. Many people stop talking, but never stop reacting. They keep checking, interpreting, replaying. That's not distance. That's attachment without presence. Stoicism teaches that attention is your most valuable resource. Where you place it, you give power. To become unreachable is to withdraw energy, not visibility. You may still live the same life, walk the same streets, even share the same spaces, but your emotional reactions are no longer available. True unreachability begins internally. When you stop explaining your silence to yourself, when you stop monitoring whether your absence is noticed, over time, people sense when they no longer have access to your emotional responses. Triggers lose influence. Messages lose leverage. This isn't punishment. It's conservation. Peace requires limited access. And often this is when realization begins. Not because you vanished, but because you no longer orbit their behavior. Way 4. Let time do the explaining. The mind wants instant resolution, an apology, an explanation. A moment where everything makes sense. Stoicism teaches patience over pressure. Time reveals what words never could. In emotional moments, perception is distorted. Conversations are filtered through pride, hurt, and defense. Restraint allows truth to emerge naturally. Over weeks and months, absence becomes contrast. And contrast creates understanding. Words argue, time demonstrates. Letting time speak also protects your healing. It prevents emotional decisions that reopen wounds. With distance, urgency fades. Clarity replaces craving. And paradoxically, realization often arrives only after you stop waiting for it, when your life stabilizes. Time carries the message without your involvement. Way 5. Strengthen your inner world, not your image. Modern culture pushes visible recovery, signals of success, curated progress. Stoicism chooses emotional refinement instead. Real strength is not displayed, it's lived. Leveling up emotionally means responding with clarity instead of impulse. Feeling, without being controlled by feeling. Emotions are signals, not commands. When you pause before reacting, you reclaim authority over yourself. Public growth often still depends on reaction. Private growth belongs entirely to you. It shows up as quicker recovery, fewer explanations, steadier behavior, and this stability follows you into every future relationship. Quiet emotional mastery leaves lasting impressions, not because it was shown, but because it reshaped how you move through life. Way 6. Release the outcome to life. After loss, the mind clings to imagined justice, balanced scales, delayed realizations. Stoicism calls this attachment another form of suffering. Amor fati, acceptance of fate, means trusting the unfolding without resentment, not resignation. Alignment, you still act with integrity. You simply stop demanding insight from others on your schedule. When you release the need for visible regret, peace stops being conditional. Patterns reveal themselves. Consequences unfold without your involvement, and when you stop emotionally chasing outcomes, absence gains weight on its own. Life does the explaining. Way 7. Move forward without looking back. At some point, reflection must give way to motion. Stoicism was never about standing still. It was about forward movement guided by reason. Looking back often pretends to be learning, but becomes attachment. True freedom begins when your life is no longer shaped by what ended. Closure is not required for progress. Action creates resolution. Routine, purpose, and values quietly replace emotional attachment. You don't erase the past, you outgrow it. And when people remember, they don't recall dramatic endings. They remember that you didn't return, not out of pride, but out of growth. From a Stoic view, this is not victory, it's consequence. You lived by self-mastery instead of reaction, and life adjusted. None of these ways are designed to influence anyone else. They all point inward, toward the discipline the Stoics valued above all else. Self-governance. Silence without growth is empty. Detachment without grace becomes avoidance. Distance without clarity becomes isolation. But when practiced together, these habits build a life governed from the inside, not negotiated from the outside. Peace is not created by being remembered, it's created by inner order. When you stop reacting, explaining, and chasing outcomes that aren't yours to carry, silence becomes strength. Dignity returns without effort. If one idea stayed with you today, leave a simple reminder in the comments, something like, "My peace is my responsibility." Not for approval, but for alignment. If this message resonated, this space is for those who value quiet strength, inner clarity, and progress without noise. Until next time, move forward steady, grounded, and no longer shaped by what has already passed.